I view that this period is fairly inevitable. And any asset that becomes $1 trillion liquid asset is going to get ETFs built on it in some jurisdictions. And in the United States case, we have some degree of separation of powers. And so even though the SEC didn't particularly want this, they lost in court. And so people want this. And so now more people can access it. There are pools of capital that, there's retirement accounts, there's managed assets, and a lot of them have not been able to access it. And now they can. So, and there's like imbalances built up. So the fact that they could only access it with like grayscale has been an issue. And now there's kind of like this big release valve where a lot of capital can finally get out of that big entrapment and move to other places that are kind of more professionally managed or cheaper and things like that. So I think that's a process that's inevitable. I think concerns around centralization are somewhat overblown. Not to say that they shouldn't be brought up, but basically I think that there already was a pretty big chunk of Bitcoin sitting in grayscale. Now it's rotating into BlackRock and Fidelity and a few others. The overall pie is growing moderately that's in those environments. A lot of people in those environments, they prefer that. Whereas I think it's important to say make self-custody reasonably easy for people. To make sure people understand the risks. But I think, again, it's just people have more optionality now. There are a lot of people that wanted to have Bitcoin in their 401k and couldn't. Now they have more options, or, they have assets with an RIA and he or she is just unable or unwilling to put some of that money into Bitcoin. Now they can. And so I think that's inevitable. Even if it's not good or bad, it's just inevitable, right? So it's not like, I see people saying, oh, Bitcoin deviated from its mission because ETFs exist for it now. Well, it's like, well, Bitcoin didn't make the ETFs. The fiat system made ETFs for Bitcoin. And that's basically the fiat system upgraded its APIs to plug Bitcoin in this method. ETFs are basically an API into different asset classes. They decided to plug into Bitcoin now. And, you watch out for big centralized honeypots, whether it's ETFs, whether it's Binance, whenever a lot of Bitcoin are in one big custodian, that is a risk. So right now, a lot of them are in Coinbase. I consider that not ideal. So I think people should be cautious about that. If you're going to hold ETFs, you probably should diversify across custodians. But I also think that, it's good to take self-custody. And so, we'll see where that shakeouts over time. But I think that that's just an inevitable stage that Bitcoin was always going to go through if it was ever going to get as big as it has now.
Is there a risk that like more mainstream and more, stupid money being thrown at it, starts chipping away from its core principles? I mean, not only I'm thinking not only of the ETFs, but also, stupid JPEGs and stuff.
I mean, I think there's a risk, but I view it as overblown because I view Bitcoin as well designed as is. It has a block size limit for a reason. And I think that basically the market forces will play out. I think, basically, if you view what Bitcoin is the most immutable and decentralized database we've ever made as humanity. I think the biggest killer use case for that is money. If you have a really good decentralized open ledger, money is like by far the biggest addressable market for that. That's like $100 trillion market in today's dollar terms. It's a massive market. The total addressable market for that in theory is huge. You can timestamp other things to prove that they were not changed. You can use for speculative meme tokens. I think most of those that's like, at most a few $1 trillion market, non-monetary use cases for the most immutable database. I think that over the long arc of time, the monetary use case is way more denser. It's a way bigger market. And it pushes that aside. I think that while Bitcoin gets adopted, as it goes through, as more people look at it and figure out things they can do with it, it goes through these manias, it goes through fads. I think they burn themselves out over time. I first heard about Bitcoin back in like 2010 or so. And I was never one of those people that was like adversarial toward it. I was never like, oh, that's stupid. But I was kind of like, what's the chance that works? Or that sounds neat. I should probably put more time into it, and then I never get around to it, right? So it's kind of like neutral toward it, or like I'm rooting for those guys, but what are the chances that this is the money that finally, is this Hayekian money? And but when you watch it go through like 3 cycles of, it has a big adoption cycle, it goes down 75% or more, it recovers, goes up to another big cycle, goes down. Over, kind of every cycle, I would go and like look at the ecosystem and see the UX was getting better. And so I finally was like, okay, I have to put the time in to understand this. And so I did that back in 2017. And then I watched the block size war play out. And all of that was very informative. Basically, it kind of showed things in practice. Who controls the network? How immutable are the rules of the network? How do network effects work in this industry? Is the ultimately, I mean, Bitcoin is control logic. It's a system. Is the system stable? And when you see it operate through multiple environments, the answer is yes. And so basically, once I saw Bitcoin reach a degree of critical mass and prove itself as fairly anti-fragile, I said, well, if no one can kill this thing, and if it is now kind of critical mass of network effects, then that has macro implications. Now there's a money that moves faster than fiat while being scarcer than gold. And that has macro implications. So, for example, there's 160 different fiat currencies in the world. All of them are local monopolies of their own jurisdiction, and they control that monopoly in a handful of ways. One is they tax everything other than their own currency in their jurisdiction. But then two, they control the inflows in and out of that country, right? So if you want to bring value into a country, there's really two main ways to do it in the pre-Bitcoin era. One is ports of entry, which are obviously pretty easy to surveil. Some gets through, but it's pretty limited. And then two is wire transfers in and out, but they're also surveilled and controlled. Whereas when you have internet money, you can anyone in that country can just hold up a QR code on a video call and I can send it to them. They can send me a payment string. They can, so every person in that country that's internet connected can get money from outside. The borders of that money are now way more porous. So they're less locked into their local monopoly, and more can go out and participate in the free market of monies around the world. So if they want, and the same thing applies to some extent with stablecoin, which is that they can say, well, instead of Egyptian pounds, I want US stablecoins to hold for the next 3 months. And they're centralized, but it's a market of money now. So they're saying, well, instead of my local currency, I want something that's reasonably stable that I want to hold. And so, they'll get stable coins. If they want something longer term, they'll get Bitcoin. And that has macro implications. That breaks apart all those borders. And then when you look at macro, size matters, liquidity matters. Just because something exists, if it's not being understood at scale, then it doesn't really matter yet. And so in the first 10 years of Bitcoin's history, it wasn't really at a size that really impacted macro. Whereas in the past 5 years or so, it finally got big enough where it's starting to have an impact. Similar for stablecoins, these things matter on some sort of macro flow scale now. And so they can now change how currencies operate, because now, for example, various currencies are under more pressure, which I think is good because their people have more options to escape those currencies. And they can hold whatever currency they want. I think Bitcoin's the best one, but if they want to hold dollar stablecoins or gold-backed stablecoins or whatever, they have various kind of choice now. And though the fact that all those financial borders are super porous allows market forces to exist on money in a way that it's been stopped from doing for the past many decades because of these kind of enforceable local monopolies.